Hello and welcome. My name is Brooke Axtell, and I am here with Josie Lear, the founder and director of the Men's Story Project, joined by Emiliano Diaz de Leon, who is the men's engagement specialist for the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And we're so excited to be with you tonight. We're going to have a conversation about the film, The Mask You Live In. We're going to explore themes on masculinity. We'll talk with Josie about why she created the Men's Storytelling Project, Story Project, and talk about how you can contribute. We'll also share a little bit about why storytelling for social change is so important. And we would love for you to share your questions, your comments, and to participate with us tonight. We're thrilled to have you here. So we'll take just a moment to let people join in, and then we'll get started with a conversation.
And in the meantime, if folks want to write into the chat where you're calling in from and your name, that would be very welcome.
So before we get started with questions, Emiliano, can you just share a little bit about what you do with TAASA?
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. My name is Emiliano Diaz de Leon. I'm the men's engagement specialist with the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. Of course, we are the Sexual Assault Coalition for Texas. We represent all the rape crisis centers here in Texas. I've been with TAASA now for 12 years. I serve primarily as a training and technical assistance provider for what we call block grant grantees. It's just a fancy name for our rape crisis centers here in Texas. And so, yeah, I provide training and technical assistance around victim advocacy and prevention. And so I'm really happy to be with the two of you tonight.
Wonderful, thanks for joining us. And Josie, can you share a little bit about yourself and your work?
Absolutely. So thank you, Rick, for organizing this. So I'm Dr. Josie Lear. I'm a public health researcher and practitioner. I have been working in the field of gender-based violence prevention and response for 20 plus years, and in the field of promoting healthy masculinities since 2008. And I'm going to be sharing today, I'm excited to share about the Men's Story Project, which has been a labor of love since 2008. It's a project that engages boys and men in publicly sharing their own personal stories that explore and challenge ideas about masculinity so as to promote healthy masculinities and also health and equality for people of all genders. So
excellent. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the project. Do we have any questions yet? I don't have a visual on them.
I don't see any questions in the chat
yet. So we'll get started. I'd love to start with you, Emiliano. We recommended the film, The Mask You Live In, for our community to watch and reflect on. And I'd love to open the conversation, because it's such an important theme in the film, with this question. What are toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity, and why do they matter?
For that question. And I hope everyone has had an opportunity to review the film before today's discussion. And if you haven't, I would still encourage you to watch it. But most importantly, watch it with the boys and men in your life. I think that's a really simple act of just engaging in this deeper conversation about toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity. So the way that I think about toxic masculinity is it's a set of unhealthy behaviors normalized as masculine. That's how I define toxic masculinity. And so, for example, we might think of the phrase "I'm the man," right? This concept of that I have to be the breadwinner, I have to be the provider, I have to be respected, I have to be admired, right? These ideas of really problematic ideas that we have about masculinity. And then I think we have the definition of a call from A Call to Men, which really resonates with me, of healthy masculinity. So in their definition, they talk about it allows for an expression of a full range of emotions, right? Our ability as men to express ourselves fully, in addition to be vulnerable, right? The act of being vulnerable, of showing weakness, of showing fear, of showing pain, treating people equally, right? Like the act of just treating people equally, especially girls and women, is an act of healthy masculinity. Listen and value women, right? When we listen and value women, it has profound effects on our relationships, not just with the girls and women in our lives, but just in general in society, in terms of creating an equitable workplace, school environments. I think those are sort of part of the definition that really resonate with me, as well as serving as a role model, right? The things that we can do to be examples for the boys and men in our lives. And it matters because we don't have to just to subscribe to these narrow, outdated notions of masculinity. They don't work for me anymore. I don't subscribe to them. But I didn't come to that realization overnight. This film is just one way for us to have a conversation about this issue. And I want to live in a world where my 10-year-old son doesn't have to act like a man, and he can just be his beautiful, brilliant self, right? And so this film is really, I've seen it 1,000 times, and it really speaks to me differently every time that I see it. But I think for me, that's how I distinguish toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate your insights. And I would love to hear for you, as you've seen the film so many times, what is a moment in the film that's really powerful or transformative for you?
There's a part of every boy and man's story that resonates with me. But the story of Stephen and his son Jackson speaks to me as a father of color in such a deep and profound way. It reminds me of the pain and trauma of fatherlessness I live with, and how it informs the father that I want to be and the future that I want to create with my son. Their story also gives me hope and a deep appreciation for the gift and joy I find in being a father. And I know that there are so many other men like myself who, again, can identify with both the experiences of Stephen and Jackson. But that particular moment always reminds me of my own experiences growing up.
For folks who haven't watched the film, can you say a little bit more about what about that relation, like maybe describe it for the viewers who weren't able to see the film? So
in the film, they profile different men, and what's unique is that this is a profile, a short vignette of Stephen and his son Jackson. And Stephen talks a little bit about his experiences of growing up without a father and being raised by a single mom, and not having a relationship with Jackson's mom, and how they've, how he sort of has taken on the responsibility for his son as a single parent. And that story, I think, just, every time I hear it, I'm reminded of what that must have felt like to be Stephen, right? As he's describing his relationship both to his mom and to not having his father in his life. And it's painful, but there's also a moment of joy in terms of their relationship. You know, you get to see them playing and talking with each other, just being with each other. And I'm reminded of the time that I get to spend with my own son and the kinds of conversations that we have that I never had with my father. And I think that's, you know, again, that story really speaks to me on so many levels, but it's also painful, right? I know there are probably a lot of boys and men who are watching this who share that experience of growing up fatherless or being raised by a single parent, and not having the relationship that they would have wanted with their father. Or they had a relationship with their father that was abusive. And so, you know, here's our opportunity for that relationship to be transformative. And, you know, I think my son challenges me to be a better man, but he also challenges me just to be a better father, and a better human. He recently interviewed me for a podcast for Casa de Esperanza on Latino fatherhood. And he asked me a series of questions that really challenged my thinking, right? And I think I really wish that I had a man in my life that would have done that for me. And so I can't tell you how profound the relationship with my son has been, both in transforming and healing as well. So from all that trauma and all that abuse that I experienced, you know, it really has been healing as well. And so, yeah, I definitely encourage, and there's so many other stories from the boys and the men in the film that really resonate and speak to me. And I'm sure that's going to be the case for everyone who has watched this film. So I'm sure in the chat box, if the film resonated with you in the same way, let us know how, and because it's an important part of learning and growth for me as well. So it's just one story of many that we get to hear in the film.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. There's such a tenderness in those scenes. And I love when he was telling the story about how his little boy came to him and explained to him, "Daddy, I'm sensitive." And then he talked about how he realized he needed to really support and nurture that sensitivity. And he did a Google search on how to be sensitive because it was just something that was so foreign to him. It wasn't something he was raised in. And then, you know, the tenderness of the moment where they talk about putting feelings in the feelings box. So, you know, they created this ritual where they would share notes and share their feelings about each other throughout the week and then open it together on Sundays. And I just thought there was such a beautiful tenderness in that ritual and those conversations. So thank you for sharing that. I would love to hear from you as a men's outreach specialist. What is one of the greatest challenges you see for men who want to move towards healthy masculinity and they want to be a part of the solution of ending all forms of interpersonal violence? What are some of the challenges there for them engaging?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This was one of those questions I really had to, that just came to me immediately, my answer. One of the greatest challenges we face as men is around accountability. Our ability to hold ourselves and other men accountable for our failures. Whether we're acting in sexist, homophobic, racist, or transphobic ways, we can do more to call ourselves and other men in. And the onus of that work, I think, should be collectively on us as men, and not solely on the girls and women who have been impacted by our violence and oppression, which was generally historically has been the case around accountability. I think it's probably the most difficult conversation from experience that I've had with the men in my life, that men have had with me around my failures, my mistakes, my problematic behaviors. I think if folks are curious, you can Google and learn a little bit more about my story in terms of my own experiences with perpetration of dating violence coming up, and how critical it was for me to be a part of a group of men, and to have women in my life who held me accountable for that behavior, who really challenged these notions that I held on really tight, about masculinity. And you know, that group of men and women really changed my life, really helped me understand the value and the importance of accountability, and really believe that I could change. And I know there are a lot of folks who are watching right now who probably feel the same way, right? Who are here because they've made some sort of change in their life, or they want to change, or they want to grow. And I think ultimately having folks that are going to hold you accountable, whether it's your partner, whether it's a community, whether for me it's women of color, whether it's, you know, the mentors in my life, you know, all of that is key to my success, right? To my growth as an individual and as a man. So I think accountability is just, we keep on coming to this issue of accountability as a movement as well. And I know that it unfortunately is an ongoing theme among male activists and male educators and male leaders. And so we just keep on coming back to this issue of accountability. We still have so much work to do in this area, but I think the first step is a willingness to learn and to listen, and to take responsibility and ownership of those failures that we are going to make. So I think, you know, that's just a critical, difficult conversation for us to have.
I would love to hear more from you around this piece, this call to accountability, knowing that there's so much transformation that still needs to happen on both the collective cultural level and the private interpersonal level. What gives you hope as you do this work?
This generation of boys and men, you know, a great example of this is this online campaign called Unpacking Men, which you can find on Instagram. And it's a model of engaging each other, engaging other men, about the difficult but necessary conversations around toxic masculinity. So if you just use that, search for it on Instagram, you'll see those conversations that are happening over the last week between men, having really sometimes very vulnerable and difficult, but really profound conversations. They've impacted me on so many levels, and I'm so proud to see men who are engaging in really creative ways in these conversations. You know, what's interesting about this particular campaign, it was created by a woman of color, right? Because she was tired of engaging in those conversations with the police and then, and so, you know, this is really intended for us to step up and to do the work, right? For us to engage in those conversations with each other and to model a way forward, right? Using social media, using Instagram Live to have those conversations. And so I want to, you know, I'm seeing more and more of those kinds of really creative ways happening amongst the boys and men in our state and in our country and the world, right? There's really some very dynamic, creative ways of engaging in conversations around masculinities, just like the Men's Story Project, right? Is just one way of engaging in these conversations with each other and with our communities. And so I think that's ultimately why we're excited about bringing this project to the state of Texas, because, you know, it does give it does give me a sense of hope, sort of moving forward. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for your work, and I'm excited to collaborate on the project. I would love to move to you, Josie, now, and to hear more about your work. And I would love to hear what inspired you to create this project, and what is the impact that you've seen in this work?
Thanks for the question, Brooke. So let's see. It's a big question. What led me to start the Story project? So I'm going to also be sharing a couple of slides that walk through what the project is. So actually, if it's all right, why don't I start with that, and then once people know what the project is, then I'll talk a little bit more about my own background and why I started it, because and people will know. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to share computer sound. All right. From the beginning. Okay, can you see those slides?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So this is a project that we're going to be bringing to Texas. And so this Facebook Live event today is really an invitation for everyone who's watching to think about participating or sharing the call for submissions for this project with men and masculine identifying folks who you might know who live in Texas and who might be interested. So by way of brief background, so I come to this work from a social justice and public health standpoint, this work of helping to promote healthy masculinities. And overall, research around the world has been showing, study after study, that social ideas about masculinity, that say that boys and men are supposed to be tough and strong and dominant, and these toxic ideas in particular, that violence against women is acceptable, that violence against other men is normal and can achieve good purposes. It's not okay for men to go to the doctor to seek healthcare. They need to be stoic and tough. It's not okay to seek mental health care because they have to be stoic and tough. Even this idea that real men wear masks or don't wear masks, and the whole politicization, around mask wearing right now is very connected with masculinities. Men's substance abuse, sexual violence. There are so many issues from a public health and social justice standpoint that are deeply entwined with ideas about masculinity, right? And this just shares the content. Then I'll talk a little bit more about. Oh, actually, if folks could mute me because I'm hearing myself. So this is a quick research background on this topic of masculinities and health. And this really summarizes a lot of what's in the film, The Mask You Live In. And the basic idea is that, we grow up in this cultural soup of gender norms, these dominant notions of how boys and men and girls and women supposedly should be and relate to each other. And it has an impact on everybody's well-being. And so studies have found that men and boys who buy into these more rigid or harmful ideas about masculinity are more likely to be affected by or perpetrating these kinds of problems, right? So bullying and hazing, homophobia, transphobia, supporting or perpetrating different forms of violence against women and other men and folks of all genders. It's connected ideas about masculinity that are about men's dominance and the importance of having lots of women. It contributes to higher rates of HIV and STIs, unplanned pregnancies. I'm just going to skip over to the right. Research has found also that men who feel like they can't share how they're feeling or seek support, it connects with their reporting that they have less intimate relationships. They seek mental and physical health care later and less than women. Men who have rigid ideas about masculinity are more likely to report symptoms of depression. They're more likely to engage in substance abuse. And ultimately that translates also into higher rates of suicide for men compared to women. And then we also see leading causes of death, like risky driving is a leading cause of death in young men ages 16 to 24. They're often in the car with their male friends. So ideas about masculinity are linked with higher rates of risk-taking, lower rates of self-protective and healthy behaviors, which ultimately translates into higher death rates for men in the United States and actually around the world, related to more risky behavior and less self-protection. And then mass shootings is also, these mass shootings, which are primarily perpetrated by men, have also been linked with, ideologies around how they should be or be respected as men. So the bottom line is also, on the positive side, research is finding that when we do work that helps to promote healthy masculinities, it actually helps to improve well-being for everybody. And so with all of that background, which is also so beautifully presented in that film, the question becomes, what can we do, right? How can we help to continue changing social norms so that men are and boys are just allowed to be their full spectrum human selves? And it's really interesting that even though this conversation is happening more and more, it's still pretty uncommon. So right now in the US, there are pretty few public forums that are discussing men's socialization and that are highlighting healthy masculinities. And so I like to show this slide of the elephant in the room that says, it's kind of the elephant that people don't even see. Like we just have these phrases that boys will be boys and it's just how men are. And people often take for granted that this is just how life is. This is how boys and men are. And this is natural. And there's just one way to be a man and all of that, right? And so to respond to this pretty huge challenge, around social ideas about masculinity that foster harm, I started this project in 2008 called the Men's Story Project. And it's a replicable project that's been spreading in different parts of the US and abroad, where boys and men publicly share very personal stories in different kinds of artistic and expressive mediums that explore and challenge ideas about masculinity through the lens of their own life experience. So the stories are just focused on their own experience. And the purpose of the project is to generate reflection and dialogue in the audience, and to affect folks in terms of attitudes and behaviors and ultimately social norms, to promote healthier masculinities and social justice and gender justice. And so these storytelling events happen, we film them to create social media, full-length educational films, and so on. And just to share a sense of what this project can look like, I'm going to play this trailer for you because it does a lot better job of describing it than anything I could say in my own words here. So this is from our first live production. And I'm going to go in and share again.
I love men.
There's social training, right? There's ideas of how boys and girls and men and women are supposed to act and look and feel.
So I'm still nervous. Very nervous.
It's time to break the cycle, to stop the alcohol, to stop the violence in my father, and the violence of my father's father.
Of all the men in my family who had killed in the name of honor.
Urinal or stall? Stall or urinal?
My father is no.
Being hostage to an image of gender, women good, men evil.
I work out 4 hours a day. I work out when I sit on the couch.
I decided to tell my parents that I was gay.
Stand aside while Felicia and I guide our children past racism and hate.
This project is about healing.
It's the place where the floss was yearn. Gold teeth and bling ice on.
All day I'd been wondering if I could get it up. After all, they were about to cut my ball off. It's not good for the libido.
It feels so good, people. I chose to be a male to express it outwardly, what I felt within, but I didn't choose and don't choose all the baggage that comes along with being a man in this society.
This is to Jason and to Greg and to Steve and Chris and Dave.
We are part of the silent majority of African American men, and we are proud to be loving and compassionate men.
I'm gonna jump back into the slides for a couple more.
Great, thank you.
All right, are you able to see that?
I can see it.
Okay. Okay, one sec. All right, so I'm gonna just take a couple more minutes to describe the Men's Story Project and some of the work that we've done so far. And as folks are listening on this Facebook Live, just keep in mind that you're being invited to participate, to submit stories, to share this with folks who might be interested in participating as storytellers in Texas for this Texas production. So what is a Men's Story Project production? Typically, the way it has looked is that there is a very diverse, amazing group of presenters of all very diverse walks of life who form a community of learning and creation over the course of several weeks. And they're crafting and honing their own stories that they're going to share publicly. And so at a given event, they share their stories, and then it's followed by a dialogue with the audience, where the audience has time to share their own reflections and ask questions and talk back. And the stories that presenters have shared have had some key themes of celebrating, challenging, and resisting. So celebrating sources of love and beauty and joy in their life, like relationships, being a father, mentorship that they've received or given, traditions that have been strengthening, mentors that they've had. Challenging is stories that they have that basically challenge the dominant paradigm of masculinity, that challenge the dominant narrative of masculinity. Their own counter narratives, their own stories that want to challenge that status quo through the lens of their own experience. And then the resisting is their own stories that talk about how they are resisting or challenging intersecting forms of oppression like racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and so on. So over the course, what we're going to be doing in Texas and what we've been doing so far in general is that there are these workshops where presenters are honing their stories, giving each other feedback, learning together about the issues, and just building what have turned out to be really long-term, beautiful friendships in many cases, and just building community. And folks, as I mentioned, come from very diverse walks of life. And then these events get filmed, as I mentioned before, to create social media, films, and oftentimes they've actually turned into ongoing groups. And the kinds of stories that we're inviting for the Texas Men's Story Project are similar to what folks have been sharing for the past 12 years. Add some piece of your life experience or your journey. How you challenged sexism when another guy said or did something, how you supported a survivor, your experience as a dad, how you stepped in to prevent violence or harassment from happening, or how you didn't and what you commit to doing in the future, for example. How you came to a place of pride or self-assertion or resilience in the face of being on the receiving end of some form of oppressive ideology like racism or homophobia. Journeys of change that folks have been on, including there are men who've talked about ending, how they came to end their own abusive behavior toward a female partner, for example, how they sought help, what they reflected on, what they commit to for the future. Men have talked about how they sought mental health care after delaying that because they felt like they shouldn't. It wasn't manly to do so or strong to do so. And how they went and sought help and how that was for them. Journeys of unlearning, such as unlearning homophobia. And ultimately, these productions, when everybody is sharing these stories together, become a really beautiful modeling of what solidarity can look like in action, of folks of diverse backgrounds standing together for healthy masculinities, for social justice, for gender justice. And with that said, it's really helpful when folks are sharing their stories of change to hear how they went through that journey. Not just, hey, I went from A to B, isn't that great? But how? And then also an emphasis with all of this on humility. So for folks who are thinking about submitting a piece for this project and participating, just to say that we're not going to put you on a pedestal and proclaim that you think that you're perfect. That's not what this work is about. It's about sharing our journey in progress, sharing questions that we have, sharing things that we've learned, but with the knowledge that we're always going to be works in progress. And these are just some images just to share with you some of the vibe of the project. These are from prior productions that we've had in different parts of the US, different parts of the world. This is in Chile, where my family is from. St. Louis University. This is in New York City. And since we're talking about violence, I'll highlight a piece from this production that was very powerful. I mean, all of the pieces are. But the fellow wearing the Black Lives Matter shirt, that's Hawk Newsom. He's the chairman of Black Lives Matter of Greater New York. And he shared a very powerful story about his own former perpetration of intimate partner violence. And he ends his piece by saying something to the effect of, it's not enough to just be woke on the topics of your choosing. And he said, I work to liberate people every day. But in order to do that, in order to work for the liberation of others, we first must work to liberate ourselves from the oppressive ideologies that we may hold. Yeah. And so this is work in Gaza and the West Bank with UN Women, in Canada. And there's a lot of text on this slide, I apologize. But so at each event, we share feedback forms, and we've gotten thousands of comments like this. And I just want to share some comments from the audience that to me really emphasize the value of men sharing their own stories that challenge dominant ideas about masculinity. Because it helps people see that they're not alone. And it also, just challenges so many ideas that folks can have. So, I laughed, cried, and rethought my own prejudices. I gained a new perspective, specifically a desire to change some of my own behavior. I learned to stay on the track that I'm on. I'm not alone in the way that I feel and think. Opened my eyes to the healing process. Gratitude for the bravery and honesty and vulnerability. And then this final quote at the bottom, it's time for men to be able to publicly share their humanity for everyone's healing. This is just an example of visual art that's been created. So Emiliana, do you want to quickly talk through our call for submissions?
Thank you, Josie. Yeah, this is a really unique, opportunity for folks here in Texas. For the folks who are listening, we want to encourage you to consider, is there someone in your life that is interested, has a story that you've heard that you think should be shared? We want to encourage you to participate in this project. If you identify with masculinity in any way, we invite you to be a part of this project. If you are a man, specifically if you're 18 years old or older and you live in Texas, we want you to be a part of this project. We're not looking for professional speakers. We're not looking for professional performers. This could be the first time that you've ever spoken to anyone or shared this particular story about your life. And so to me, that's very exciting, the opportunity to be able to learn how and to share your story with folks. What's unique about this project, it is a virtual project. Because of COVID, it restricts our ability to be together. So we will be together virtually, and you'll have an opportunity to present your story virtually to folks around the state of Texas. Those stories are really intended to explore and challenge social ideas about masculinity, all the things that we've been talking about this evening, all the things that the Masculine explores. This is really an opportunity for you to speak out and talk about the things in your life that your experiences and the joys and the pleasure and all the wonderful things as well that you get from being a man or identifying with masculinity. Of course, these pieces can be diverse mediums, whether it's poetry, a story, a letter that you want to share. It could be comedy. It could be performing a song. It could be some kind of visual art. We are hoping to collect a diverse group of stories that we can share online. Of course, these stories can be serious, but they can also be funny. But most importantly, they have to be real. They have to be your experiences, your lived experiences, or the things that you're hoping to live to experience, right? So, I want to encourage you to consider submitting your story, and that story can be up to 7 minutes max. And so we want you to think creatively about how you want to present your story to folks online. And so please consider and encourage anyone you think has a story to share with us, and encourage them to participate in this project.
Thanks, Emiliano. And I also want to emphasize that we all have stories, you know, and I was sharing with somebody before this call, you know, an example could be as simple as remembering when you were in high school and you wore shoes that were too big because you wanted to look bigger as a boy because you felt like you looked too small, you know, or a letter to a family member, or you know, so it doesn't. In other words, it doesn't have to be a very big, epic, huge piece. It can be something that's very focused about a particular moment in your life or a particular person in your life, or a particular idea about masculinity that you've struggled with, or that has fostered a challenge in your life. You know, so we're super, super open. In terms of pieces that are about violence, we definitely welcome them. It's just important that they please not identify survivors of violence without their express prior consent. And not at all children. So it can identify you as a survivor, but not other adult survivors unless you have their express written consent. And then in terms of former perpetration, you know, we also welcome your stories about that. But it's important for this project that you already have gone through a legal or restorative justice or therapeutic process for it. In other words, this project is not really a place for folks to share for the first time with anybody that they formerly perpetrated violence against someone. And then the last thing I'll say is we definitely welcome stories from both, you know, for folks who've never spoken publicly and folks who have. So it's very open on that front. In terms of the process that folks will go through to create the Men's Story Project production in Texas, so these are going to be live events that take place in September where you'll get to share your story or your piece with a live online audience. So to build up to that, to lead up to that, we're going to have a series of presenter workshops where you'll get to receive feedback on your work in progress, share feedback for other fellow presenters, learn together and reflect on topics related to masculinities and relationships and fatherhood and health and violence and so on, intersections with race and other aspects of identity. We're going to meet on Thursday nights from 7:30 to 9:30, and the facilitators will be Emiliano and myself, and we'll have special guests, probably including Brooke, who's on this call. And we'll support folks also one-on-one with your pieces, and Brooke will also be involved in that. Brooke is a phenomenal author and poet and writer.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so these workshops are going to take place starting on the 23rd of July, going through the 27th, and we ask that you would be able to attend at least 4 of them, including the first and the last. And then we're just really excited to launch this in September with these online events and hopefully, you know, big audiences to participate and engage in dialogue. And if you grant us permission, we'll record your story when you share it online so that we can then upload it to social media so that they can have a broader audience. But you don't have to give permission for that if you don't want to be filmed. It's not a prerequisite to participate in this. And so we just invite you to spread the word. The call for submissions is online, and we're going to put that into the chat, the link. So I see Josh is on our chat. So Josh, if you could please put the link for our call for submissions into the chat, that'd be super helpful. Yeah, and there at the moment, our call for submission deadline is the 7th, which is in a couple of days. We might extend it. So, you know, let us feel free to reach out if you need more time. And it's ideal if you're able to share a full draft. If not, a concept paragraph is also can be sent in on that online form. And this is our contact info. There's a lot of contact info here. The key one to note in the middle is Josh. He's our amazing TAASA MSP specialist. So that's his email in the middle if you have any questions. Yeah, I'm hoping that Josh can put the link for the call for submissions into the chat so that folks can see it and access it. Okay.
Excellent, thank you so much. And I have a personal question for you, Josie. How has being a part of this work transformed you over the last decade or so?
That is a very big question.
It is, but I would just love to hear your take, because this is deeply transformative and healing work, and you've been holding space for a lot of men. So how has that impacted you?
For me, this work is a deep labor of love, and it has been a joy. And I have grown stewarding this project, you know, and what I've been doing initially in the first few years, I produced US and in Chile. And based on the overwhelming response, you know, from audience members and presenters, and people were saying, this needs to keep happening, this needs to spread. I wrote a training guide and a license for groups to create their own. And it's been a joy to help local teams create their own productions in different parts of the country, and also Gaza and the West Bank and Canada. And so for me, it's been deeply moving to see how powerfully people can affect each other just by sharing their own life experience, their own lessons learned, their own journeys, the steps that they took, mistakes that they've made, you know, and just to see the power of us sharing our stories with each other and helping people see that they're not alone. You know, we actually published 2 evaluation studies of this work, and we interviewed audience members and presenters formally and asked, what did you get out of this? You know, as a presenter, as an audience member, what did it do for you? You know, to share these, to craft and share your story, or to be in the audience bearing witness to what folks are sharing on the stage, and then talk about all of it with your family and friends and, you know, people you know. And I've just been moved by the impacts, you know, for audience members. A core theme was, for a lot of guys in the audience and men in the audience, has been realizing that they're not alone. Mm-hmm. For hearing, just really valuing the opportunity to hear for the first time, in many cases, men publicly sharing about things that they'd never heard other men talking about, that they had experienced. Men realizing that the way that they were taught they're supposed to be as a man was actually socially constructed, and it could be changed, and is actually not set in stone. And, you know, this concept of masculinity is that there's actually as many ways to be a male human in the world as there are in the world, that there's not just one idea, one correct answer to this made up question of, or this made up dictate to be a man, right? Mm-hmm. So understanding that it's all made up and realizing that. You know, I've also really been moved by the prejudice reduction impacts that this project has had based on audience members have shared, and also presenters. You know, because when you get the chance to get to know somebody, you know, either from hearing their personal story or getting to interact with them in a group if you're a presenter, you know, that can be really eye-opening paradigm shifting, you know, and how often do we get to hear really personal stories from people? You know? So I've just been moved to see that kind of impact as well. Because when men are up on the stage, you know, but they're also talking about how it is to be a person of their race, of their sexual orientation, of their gender identity, who used to perpetrate some, you know, form of violence, or who used to hold some kind of oppressive view. Like all of this, you know, kind of to help people realize that they share common ground with somebody of a background different from their own, or see how somebody made a change and get the sense that maybe they can too. So there's obviously so much there, and it's hard to summarize, but it's you know, there are so many ways that I have seen storytelling, personal public storytelling, be healing and transformative. It's just it's such a gift when anybody chooses to make that effort to share something about their own life with others, right? Because then we get the opportunity to learn from you and grow from your experience. So I'll leave it there for now. But that's some of what
resonates with me so much. And I just wanted to check in before we transition into the next piece, whether we have any questions from our audience tonight.
Yeah, if folks want to type into the chat any questions or reflections.
I'd love to hear from you. And I can transition into the next section if something comes up. We're happy to respond. One of the things that has been significant for me as I've been reflecting on storytelling for social change is just in my own journey using story as a catalyst for social justice. There have been two pieces that have been really vital for me. One is seeing the potential for inner healing, and the other is seeing the potential for cultural healing. So I've had the opportunity to share my story of overcoming different kinds of trauma in my life and finding resilience. And one of the things that I found in that process was that even though it was incredibly challenging to be vulnerable, when I finally spoke the truth I needed to speak, the shame I felt and the pain I felt no longer had power. I didn't have to live in a sense of apologizing or needing to hide some facet of who I am. And so it was deeply healing on a personal level, but it also gave me the opportunity to connect with and hear from people from all over the world who could see themselves in my story, where they recognized in my truth and in my vulnerability some piece of what they had endured or overcome, and they found some possibility of hope. And so for me, that was such an affirmation of how these two are integrated, the inner healing and the collective healing. And I think what I learned about storytelling as a tool for addressing injustice is that through that storytelling process, we learn that what is most painful and difficult can be named, and life can be affirmed in the face of it. And as you said, we learn that we're not alone, and we are given through story this gift of connection. And the other piece that I discovered was that storytelling in itself is a way of knowing. And we learn through the storytelling process that our suffering and the suffering of the world is a form of knowledge, and we can channel that knowledge into compassion and into change. And in a way, telling my story saved my life, but it also became a catalyst for inviting other people to make the kinds of choices they needed to make in order to save their own lives. And sometimes that was physical, but sometimes that was just emotional, recognizing their value, recognizing that another path was possible. And so something I think about when I'm engaging with storytellers is, where is the wound and where is the medicine? And I think every powerful story has a wound and it has inherent in it medicine. And for me, storytelling has been one of the primary ways that I have released shame. And for me, part of letting go of the shame was recognizing that my story is part of a greater story. And that it's not just about me and my personal experience, it's about the collective, and it's about being of service to that. And so, you know, as I've been in conversation with men recently about maybe participating in the project, one of the things that's come up is maybe some fear or resistance to engaging in the process, even though they have these incredible stories to tell. And so for somebody that may be either thinking about submitting to the project, or even just in general, working with story as a tool for social change, one of the things I really want to encourage you to think about is, what is stronger than your fear? Is it what you're curious about? Is it what you're passionate about? Is it a relationship you really want to honor? What's more powerful than your fear? Is it a commitment that you're willing to make for yourself and your community? And I think ultimately the only way that we can move through fear when it comes to being vulnerable and sharing our stories is some form of love, some form of radical love. And I think it's not just about love for the storytelling process or even our audience, but it's about having enough compassion for ourselves, for our own vulnerabilities, our own fears, so that when we question the validity of the work or we think about how it might be received, we're able to kind of come back, and instead of fixating on the fear of, okay, is this going to be good enough, or how is it going to be received, to really go to that place of trust and fundamentally know that because you are human, you are worthy, and because you're human, you have truth that's worth sharing. And what I love about this project is really the only remedy for overcoming our fear of being vulnerable is healing community. And I love that this project builds in the community from the beginning. We're not just asking people to share vulnerable and bold stories. We are saying we want to invite you into this process. We want to support you so that being vulnerable is not just safe, but it's liberating. And, you know, I believe that, you know, for me, I have hesitated to share pieces of my story in the past because I didn't want to be reduced to my trauma. And I didn't want people to think that that's all I am when they look at me, and to be reduced to that and to almost feel dehumanized all over again. And what I realize is that the more I speak openly and from the heart, I know that I have no reason to be ashamed, and I continue to do it because I want other people to know that they're not alone, and that we're not the story of our trauma, we are the storytellers. And that's really the truth that I want to, you know, be able to affirm as we're engaging in this project, that it's not just about, Story for Social Change is not just about focusing on the broad scope of social justice issues, it's also about affirming our full humanity. And sometimes it's simple, and sometimes it's intimate, and it will intersect with the broader themes and the broader issues. But sometimes the most powerful stories for social change are not the ones that try to go broad and analyze the entire scope of an issue. It's the intimate one. It's the one that reveals something true and real about your life. And by going deep enough and being honest enough about your own life, it will intersect with the broader landscape, and it will speak to these broader issues. But we don't need broad stories about sexism or racism. We need the intimate truths about what it's like to be you and move through the world, and the things that break your heart and the things you're willing to fight for. Like, those are the stories that we need, because we don't have all the answers. But I think the gift of story is that we don't have to have the ultimate answer or the ultimate resolution to our suffering, both our personal and collective suffering. But I think if we honor the process and we really affirm what makes life worth living, even in the midst of the injustice and the hurt, that we build resilience with each other. And we know that we can hurt and our communities can hurt, and yet at the same time, there's a truth that you're here to tell. and that truth is worth being heard. And so whether people participate in the project or not, I just really want to affirm that if there's a truth you need to tell, if there's a story you need to tell, it can be of service, not only in your own healing, but for the collective. And it doesn't have to be this grand, overarching analysis of all the issues that are, impacting our world right now. But if it is yours, and if it's true, and if it's honest, it will split the world wide open, because it is the most powerful tool that we have to create change. As you can tell, it's something I'm very passionate about.
I love everything you just said. Thank you so much for that incredible articulation. I'll just quickly add a couple more quick thoughts, and then I know we're going to wrap up. I want to emphasize also that this project is not a performance, and so even though folks might be using different kinds of mediums that are considered artistic, we're not thinking of the folks who join this project as performers. This is a production. You are presenting, but I just want to take that pressure off, that to co-create with all of the folks who participate is a collective public moment of truth sharing, and radical openness. So yeah, and also that, with the challenging, celebrating, and resisting, we're super interested in celebrating, so also like sources of super open, so if you have any questions, again, please feel free to contact us. I want to make sure that we've got contact info and connect with folks who are interested.
I just saw one question that I received from Gabe, right? And Gabe is not in Texas, but is very interested in the project, and he wanted to know what is the next step after we do this work in Texas. Are there other opportunities to either engage in future events or be a part of national conversations for those that are not in Texas that are interested?
So you're definitely warmly welcome to participate as an attendee for the September events. Directly, I would suggest going to the website menstoryproject.org and just hit the contact button, and there's an email there that you can use to connect with me about bringing the Men's Story Project to other states.
Great, thank you for that.
Emiliana, do you want to wrap up for us then?
Yeah, I want to thank Brooke for moderating today's conversation between me and Josie. I want to thank everybody who is watching and everyone who will watch later on. We encourage you to continue to ask questions in the chat box. And we encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions about the Texas Men's Story Project. We're very excited again about organizing and hosting this project in Texas, and we hope that you will join us and that you will help to encourage the men in your life to consider sharing a story with us. And again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Josie, for all the work that you do. And we ask that you continue to follow the work and hopefully attend one of the performances in September. So please follow us here on Facebook as well as Twitter and Instagram for updates about future opportunities to support this initiative here in Texas. And we hope that all of you have a really good night. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.